So we thank all of you for coming out tonight and being engaged and wanting to be informed. Now, I want to acknowledge our elected officials and our community leaders. First of all, I'd like to introduce our county leader for the Democratic Party, Mr. Keith Wright.
Good evening, everyone. This evening is about information, and I want to thank Griselle Thompson for working so hard, but also I want to thank District Leader Corey Ortega. But this is about information, and our other clubs will be joining us if they're not here already. Certainly the Frederick Samuel Democratic Club, the Uptown Community Democratic Club, the Martin Luther King Democratic Club, and did I miss any? And well, West Harlem Independent. Yeah. Michelle Obama Democratic Club. All right. I just want to say thank you for joining us. I want to say thank you to our panelists, especially one of my favorites, Kyle Bragg, who took time out of his busy schedule as being one of our premier labor leaders here in the city.
I will now turn the mic over to Janine Johnson so that she can give you some of the history and the background information on the proposal.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello. Hey. So, this should be a lively and spirited discussion. The Constitution is a living, breathing document, and it's something to really be excited about. So you're going to hear a lot of information tonight. The organizers have tried to present both sides to you, as you see before you. And so tonight's purpose is not to steer you in any direction. It's to make sure that you leave informed, educated, that you can educate other people, because there's a very, very, very important vote coming up on November 7th. You'll go to the polls and you'll vote like any other day that you vote. And this is probably a very, very active crowd, right? So you'll go to the poll, but make sure that you flip your ballot, because on the back, there are a few questions. There are 3 ballot proposals. The one we're talking about tonight is whether or not there shall be a constitutional convention. And the New York State Constitution has language in it that says, every 20 years, the people shall be asked a question as to whether or not they want a constitutional convention. And the framers of our Constitution, our federal Constitution, they got that part right? We have some questions and some concerns about the Electoral College or some other things that exist, right? But that one piece, the people shall be posed the question of whether or not there is a constitutional convention, is properly placed. We enjoy a representative democracy until there are times where we're just overwhelmingly dissatisfied with our state legislature. No offense to that body, I worked in that body, so I do know that body. But this is the opportunity for people to say just how frustrated and dissatisfied they are, whether or not they want to take control and have it in their own hands, decide what's going to be enshrined in the most important document that we have that governs New York. Since 1777, there have only been 9 constitutional questions presented. There have been 9 conventions. And of those conventions, only a handful of them have actually resulted in changes to the Constitution. The last such was 1964, I believe. 67. Thank you. 1967. And there were some remarkable things achieved at that time. You had to remember the history of the country, what was going on at that time. There was a Bill of Rights. There were suffrage provisions put in. People of color got a chance to actually be fully enfranchised, meaning got a chance to really have the right to vote. There were freedom for expression of religion was added to our Constitution. The age for voting was reduced at that time. There were a lot of things put into place at that time. However, it was one bill that was proposed. Nowadays we call it the Big Ugly. right? When the New York State legislature puts one big package together and presents it to their body to vote on, and usually they vote yes on it because it has so many important things in it, so many budget items in it, so many things that impact education, so many things that impact our parks, our libraries, our criminal justice, everything you can think of. They put it in this one bill and they call it Big Ugly. Well, they tried that then, but the people, once the convention created this Big Ugly, the people voted it down. They said, no, we're really not satisfied, and we're not going to go for that. We're not going to do it, right? And so here we are, posed again with the question of having a constitutional convention. There are a couple of things that I want to talk to you about, which maybe will inspire you if the question goes up, meaning if people vote yes for it. I've told you about the difficulties in having a convention. If people vote no, simple majority throughout the entire state. If people vote no on November 7th, we don't have a constitutional convention. Nothing left to talk about for another 20 years unless the legislature poses amendments that you can see on the ballot from time to time, right? But a couple of notes of interest, at least I find fascinating. Women and their representation at the Constitutional Convention has always, women have always been underrepresented, grossly underrepresented. So, right, Cordell, maybe not surprised, right? But that has an impact on the kinds of policy pieces that are discussed. That has an impact on the day-to-day lives of families. One of the issues that the legislature is battling with is the women's 10-point agenda. And there's one piece that keeps getting stuck. That's codifying Roe v. Wade, right? A woman's right to an abortion. And so that could be an issue that will come up at the Constitutional Convention to be enshrined to some degree in our Constitution. Could be, maybe not, right? We have the discussion of parkland that, and they're going to go into all of this stuff in detail probably. I don't want to take up too much of what it is that you're supposed to do and get sidetracked, because I really love this. I'm excited about it. You guys, I hope, get excited about it. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited.
Good. Yes, Constitution, right?
Wow.
Let's go to delegates. I'm sorry, Barry, I'm wrap up right now. So with delegates, the Constitutional Convention would be comprised of 204 delegates, right? There would be 3 delegates elected from each Senate district. This is if it gets voted up. Again, if you leave here today impressed enough or dissatisfied enough to vote up. 204 delegates, 3 elected from each Senate district. They run just like anyone else does run for Senate. They need 1,000 signatures to collect on a petition. They submit that, and with that, they run. They're placed on the ballot, and maybe they win, and they become a delegate. So that's 3 from each district. And then there are 15 that run statewide. And their threshold is a little bit higher of how many petitions they have to get, how many signatures they have to get, and where they have to get them from. Okay. And so those of you who live here in this community would have about 2 or 3 different Senate districts if you were interested in running or interested in supporting a candidate who was running, right? It becomes a regular election process. There's fundraising that happens to run for the office of delegate. Those delegates, if they're successful and they win, they get paid for their time. It is about a 6-month window. They will start April 9th, I believe, and they'll run about 6 months, 4 to 6 months or so, to deliberate and come up with some proposals. The convention has staff members that they hire in order to help them do their work. They get paid the same amount assembly members get paid, right? That number is 79,500. That number is also set by the Constitution, right? And so that might be an issue that comes up if there is a convention. I'm not going to go into the issues. They'll go into the issues that come up. And so, given the fact that women have been woefully underrepresented, and we currently have women woefully underrepresented in our city government, right? These recent elections didn't fare so well for women in different places. If there is, and I'm taking a personal privilege because I have a microphone right now, if there is an opportunity for a constitutional convention and for delegates to run, I would strongly encourage the women of this community and other communities to step forward, be assertive in trying to gain those positions and those seats. So, with that being said, I think I've said enough, and turn it over to process step by step. So November 7th, the ballot proposal would be on the back of your ballot, the con question, right? Flip it over. If there's a yes, then November 6th of next year, 2018, the voters will vote for the delegates. That's the process that I was just explaining. After that, after those delegates are elected, April of 2019, the delegates and the convention opens, and they start their business of hearings, and review, testimony, analysis. They start to deliberate to come up with proposals, and they negotiate. At that point, there's the recommendations are put before the people in the November 2019 election. So again, it'll be on the back of the ballot, likely, right? People will then vote yes for it, simple majority. This really is an exercise, the purest exercise in democracy that one can think of. People vote yes for it if they want it. If they don't, they vote it down. The last vote for constitutional, I believe it was the last, not the last, but in 1977, the question of having a constitutional convention was rejected. 1.6 to 1.1 million people, right? And so that is a relatively small number in relation to the population that we have in New York State. It is critical that we educate one another because this is a very, very, very important period in New York's history. We're all privileged to be a part of it, even if we vote no or you vote yes. Just make sure you vote. Thank you.
You know, part of the reason why I wanted to bring this is so that we know both sides of the issues, the pros and the cons. So our panelists, first is Miss Minister Jazz and Mr. Al Benninghoff, the campaign manager for the New York Says Yes Coalition. As well, on the other side of the issue, we have Mr. Kyle Braggs, the Secretary-Treasurer from BJ.
And for the con side, I actually kind of want to ask an inverse of that question, which is, you know, our state legislature is not representative of the population of the state as a whole. The caucus, the Black, Puerto Rican, Latino, and Asian caucus has made great strides over the years, but we are still not where we need to be on representation of minorities, and we are not where we need to be in terms of representation of women. And I'm going to also put it out there without knowing the stats. I bet we're not there on representation of young people either. So for the person who asked this question, doesn't a con present an opportunity to elect some of these people to have a say in our state constitution at a time when in 1937, I'm betting that very few of them were in that convention. And then also, how, if not in a constitutional convention, how do we then see it in the alternative process, the state legislature? How do we fix that? Which is a big question, I know. So, get a minute to answer.
I think from the start that the system's rigged against the average citizen to run for office right now. That doesn't change in this process right now because you have to elect delegates, and you expect that something to change if you have progressive delegates in a constitutional convention. But that's not going to happen because the process now is rigged so that the powerful and the well-heeled will influence, and they've already said that it will influence the election of delegates. There's a big part of this state that's not the city that is conservative, and they will focus heavily on making sure that their conservative senatorial districts elect conservative delegates that will drive an agenda that is more closely aligned with their 1% interest. And so I would say that it's incumbent on communities to continue to develop young talent to prepare them and help them be engaged in the electoral process. There are people in this room that have run for office unsuccessfully, and that's because the system that currently exists, and that's not changing for this con apparatus.
Thank you.
Let me just can I give it to.
We're out of time for that, unfortunately, but I'm going to follow up with yet another question sort of about being the delegates, and I just set it down. And this is actually getting back again to voter turnout, and this is direct to the con side. Since our voter turnout is so low, wouldn't the Constitutional Convention be helpful to make the process of same-day registration easier? Having same-day absentee ballot availability without having to be sick or out of the country, wouldn't the con help in some ways alleviate voter turnout issues?
So here's what I am as progressive as they come. So I would love to say, yes, we can get voting rights enshrined in the Constitution. Could we outlaw discrimination? We could say a woman's right to choose could be enshrined in the Constitution. As a progressive, those ideals are something I would aspire to. But the challenge here is that when you open up the Constitution, and with a process that is so flawed, there is no guarantee not only that we will get those rights, but also that things could be drawn back. That you could end up, because let's say there is this sort of Koch brothers investment, that there is this Mercer investment. They would love not just, of course they don't want same-day registration. They'd say show an ID when you go to vote. I mean, that's exactly why groups like the NAACP and New Yorkers Make the Road and groups across the state that are nonpartisan oppose a constitutional convention. If we thought, yes, we could outlaw discrimination against gays and lesbians, fine, but then I would say the people that work on these issues day in and day out, the Equality New York, oppose a constitutional convention because they fear the opposite. Everything is at risk when you... And the problem with what happens at a constitutional convention, and the people vote for these, what happens is that it becomes enshrined in the Constitution. Then there's no way out except for another constitutional convention 20 years.
Thank you. Great. And that's a minute. And then to flip on that, I want to ask sort of the inverse of the question for the pro side, which is that given voter turnout is so low, wouldn't that make electing good delegates hard so that we might not get the things we want out of a con? So,
right, so let's do exactly the same thing we've always done and expect different results, right? No. We've been doing the same thing for 40 years. Citizens Union looked back at the records and actually been using exactly the same talking points. So 1970, I'm going to talk fast now, so I only got 60 seconds. 1977, they said exactly the same thing, but boondoggle, you're going to lose all your rights, and exactly the same organizations came together and fight it. 1977. 1997, if it wasn't the time in 1997, wasn't the time in 1977, wasn't the time in 1997, and it's not the time now, when is it ever going to be the time? These voting reforms have not appeared on the ballot to grant us the opportunity to vote on changing our Constitution to allow it to make it easier for people to vote. We're not going to get it unless we fight for it, and here's the fight. And you keep bringing up all these organizations on both sides, and they are, yes, it is exactly the institutional players in Albany that do not want to see the rules of the game change. If you change voting rules, and you change ethics rules, and you change campaign finance rules, the rules of the game change. And the people who are currently elected like it that way. That's how they got elected. They don't want that thing to change, and they applied pressure on all these organizations, and a lot of, and by the way, these are all organizations' leadership that made the decision, not the people. And they said exactly, if you are for this, we are against you.
Thank you. We're following again on this idea of voting rights and ballot access, and we have a question which was, why was New York City, I think, on the pre-clearance list prior to 2013 if city government was so honorable with voting rights? So again, I guess the question is about our ballot access status as it stands currently, and how easy or hard is it to vote compared to maybe other states or for an average voter. And I think we'll start with the pro side, which I think is next. I'm not sure I did either. But,
yeah, New York City used to be on the pre-clearance list whenever they did redrawing of the council district lines. Or
oh, so this is about redistricting.
No, yeah, so if they were so honorable with people's rights of voting, why were they put on that pre-clearance list with all the other states like Alabama, Mississippi? New York City was right up in there.
Which is redistricting, not ballot access, my mistake.
But it's for their voting violations history.
So I guess let me rephrase the way I asked it and just ask, if districts are so, if New York is so good at drawing its own districts, why were we on the pre-clearance list? I guess that's the Department of Justice. No, pro starts. I don't know.
I'll start because I'm knowledgeable about pre-clearance and why we're on it. So
There you go.
that's fine. New York was on the pre-clearance list, you're exactly right. Because we, frankly, in our state legislative districts had collusion between the two parties. There was an agreement between the Speaker of the Assembly and the Majority Leader of the State Senate, which has traditionally been Republican. They realized a long time ago that if they really wanted to have a lot of power and they worked together, they could stay in power infinitely. And so these two leaders shook hands and said, you, Democrat Speaker of the Assembly, draw your lines. I, Republican Majority Leader of the State Senate, are going to draw my lines. And that's how it has been for 80 years, which is why all of the Assembly is overwhelmingly majority Democrat, and the State Senate is it's not actually, demographics have been working in our favor. They're over 2-to-1 registration advantage, Democrats to Republicans in the state of New York. And so demographics has stripped Republicans, frankly, of the gerrymandered maps they used to get themselves elected in the first place, which are the ones we use for the delegate processes. So just 10 seconds on that. The cool thing about the Constitutional Convention thing is they're multi-member districts, 3 people per thing. In 1967, 8 of the state Senate districts represented by Republicans produced 12 of the Democratic delegates. We have an opportunity, because they've packed and cracked these districts, to elect an overwhelmingly majority Democrat to the Constitutional Convention.
Thank you. And for the con side?
I don't think we've advocated that the redistricting is proper or fair. What we said was that the Constitutional Convention doesn't cure it. And what we're saying is that we roll the dice even further to allow people to play with what's already not a perfect system to further disenfranchise voting. Voter suppression is a problem nationally. And we want to make sure that the Constitutional Convention doesn't roll back rights that we currently have, and we have to continue to work to expand them. It was Jordan aptly stated that they can go and start asking for IDs to vote. That's not necessary right now, and so what we don't want to do is disfranchise voters. So we haven't said that the process is perfect. What we did say, though, that the Constitutional Convention is too risky to risk the rights that we currently enjoy.
All right. You have 10 seconds left if you want to use it, Jordan.
Okay, great.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I have a couple of questions here on this one. And I think we're starting with the con now. If voters have final say on the proposals, meaning if whatever is voted on at the convention is ultimately then put before the voters in another referendum in 2019, why is there so much opposition? Isn't this just democracy in action?
So we talked about this a little bit before. This is important. So as part of the process, we said, right, the first step that could be problematic is the delegates are elected by state senatorial district and you get a bunch of lobbyists and politicians. The second part is the lobbying, the whining and diming of these delegates. The third part then is a statewide campaign that will happen. We don't know whether it will be 2019 or 2020 because there's no limit on how long these delegates meet. They could go on for 1 year or 2 years. There aren't rules. That's part of the problem about the Constitutional Convention. There are no rules. The Constitutional Convention delegates, they make their own rules. We don't know who's going to run it. It's like so many big questions. The third part of this, though, is when the convention meets, when they're done, there will be a statewide referendum, similar to what will happen on Tuesday the 7th, where voters will decide whether they want to accept or reject any of these changes. The last time there was a vote, everything was voted down. It was because all this horse trading went on, and ultimately there was one question that everything was piled into, and it was voted down.
Thank you.
This is. Oh, can I just have like 10 more seconds? Only just to say, this is where, yeah, we trust voters, and of course, I trust voters. I think voters are fundamentally, they understand if it's free and fair. Where it's not fair or free is when you have this outside money coming in, and when you have a statewide campaign, that is where you'll see, I think, television ads, you'll see mailers.
Okay,
you will see, yeah.
Great, thank you. So, the pro side, the question was again, if voters have final say on the proposals, why is there so much opposition? Isn't this democracy in action? This is, again, what gets passed out of the con and then put on the ballot, should it happen.
One more time, baby. Say it one more time.
If voters have a final say on the proposals that are passed by the con, why is there so much opposition? Isn't this democracy in action because they get to vote on it in 2019?
Yes, it is democracy in action. It will be the first example of democracy in a long, long time because it's voice choice, just like that. What I'm hearing from the opposition is the devil that we know is better than the devil that we don't know. And so we've made this other situation out here so much more insurmountable than what it is that we're having to deal with right now. And there's no difference in the plan. So if you're saying that there's no difference and we can work this, then we can work that. If you're saying that there is a difference, then I want to understand what is the strategy that you're presenting to the people that's going to be different from this point that we should really invest in. Like, that's a direct question. Like, you know, I keep hearing, don't do this, don't do this. Tell us what to do, if you're going to suggest.
Pass it back to the con side now. I want if you can speak to either the costs of that convention or the timeline, because that is something we've got questions on our end as well.
Well, I just go back to the 1 year salary. I want to know who's going to be a delegate for 1 year. It's going to leave their job for 1 year salary and then figure out what they do after that. And you leave your job and take a $79,000 a year job, which is woefully underpaid for the folks who are in office now, probably adding to some of the corruption that exists. But I want to know who those people are who are going to rush the process because they're confined to a 1 year salary. So therefore, the process will then, by your term, be rushed, and people will have to make decisions in order to get out of that process, so that they can continue on with their life. So I just think that the whole process, there's so many unknowns about the Constitutional Convention process. It's scary. It's scary about who ends up as delegates. It's scary about what the process consists of, how committees are chosen, who gets to be on what committee. Will people from upstate be making vital decisions about people in downstate and vice versa? It's just too many unknowns to make me comfortable with this process.
Thank you, Mr. Bragg. So we're going to get back to some of the questions that we have remaining here. And I want to actually ask another question based on history, which is, one of the things that we saw in the 1968 convention was that you had influential people like, most famously, Robert Kennedy, come speak before a grandstand and then leave. What is going to be the role, do you think, of sort of the national leaders of our party connected to New York? I'll observe that both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump ran as residents of New York. Hillary Clinton was our senator. Chuck Schumer is still our senator and is the Senate Minority Leader. And you know, Trump still has a couple of houses here, I think. So how much national influence from that type of figure is going to be involved in this convention? The question is, how much influence does the president have on the outcome of the convention, but how much do both sides have on the outcome of the convention? And I think Khan goes first on this one.
So if there's a constitutional convention, we talked about some of the money that will come in. There's no question that if you put everything on the table, you open it up, you can change, you know, women's access to reproductive health. You can change voting rights. That could, you know, that everything is on the table if there's a constitutional convention, and so it's very appetizing for these. And so I think if you look at Trump and you look at, and specifically I mentioned this Steve Bannon and Rebecca Mercer. They're this Long Island, you know, billionaire. And they put money, they're part of like the whole Tea Party wave throughout the country. They're why Donald Trump in a lot of ways got elected. There is no question that they see this as a valuable investment. They said so. They will put their money at work if there's a constitutional convention. They will put their money, so will there be national influence? And that's just one group. Like you could say, you know, potentially, yeah, if there's a constitutional convention, labor will have to get involved, and the Sierra Club and the environmentalists and people that care about voting rights will have to get involved because their very existential rights are at stake, their values are at stake. But honestly, the groups, like, if you think about the groups of labor, the environmental groups, women's groups here, the NAACP, immigration groups, they're fighting wars ACLU are fighting wars across the state, across the country. They don't have the extra time, the money that it takes to fight for our very basic rights, which we already enjoy, which we already have right now. It makes so little sense, and you will see a fight because you'll have this outside national money from Donald Trump to Steve Bannon to Rebecca Mercer to the Kochs.
I want to turn it over to the pro side.
Yeah, there you go with the fear-mongering. Yeah. It says, because none of those groups are spending money on this right now, and so you keep painting that as a thing, and it's the same thing, by the way, that was painted. It's my turn to talk now. It's the same thing that was pointed out in 1997. It's the same thing pointed out. This out-of-state money is going to come into the status quo. All of these dark money specialists, they control our government now. We are not empowered now, and I apologize 1,000 pardons because the question was not about that at all. What was the question? Does anybody remember what the question was?
The question was, what influence will large figures like the president, Chuck Schumer, Hillary Clinton have?
This would be the first constitutional convention of any state in the 21st century. And Jazz is exactly right. We have the advent of the internet, and a whole ton of changes have happened since the last time we looked at our Constitution. It's in 1967, color television, great. We have all kinds of cool things that would allow this to be not only a discussion in New York, but a bunch of national people to pay attention to it too, and inspire them and lead them to do the change, because that is something, quite frankly, the Democratic Party has not been very good at recently. We have been cowering under our sheets, afraid of change, and what we have gotten is where we are today. So if we want to see something different, we have to do something different.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to shake things up a little bit. I'm going to stop with Q&A. I'm going to give people time to make their closing remarks. I'm actually going to ask each of you to stick to a hard 3 minutes this time. And then I'm going to close out with one final question after that. So we're going to do closing remarks now and then a short answer to that last question before we conclude. So let's do the opposite order that we went in. I think you were last, Mr. Marks? So now you're first. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first.
First, thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. There's a lot of information I know tonight. One thing I'll tell you is, I'll give you our website. If you have any questions, you can go to our website. You can find my contact information there. It's NewYorkersAgainstCorruption.com. There are a few things that are really important. One will so it's NewYorkersAgainstCorruption.com. One is it sort of runs through a bunch of the things we've talked about tonight. It also lists all the groups and the organizations and the people that oppose the Constitutional Convention, and it is growing. It started as 1, 2, 3, 5, 10. We're at 150 organizations now, and we're growing. But what we've heard, the more that what we see is the more voters know about what's at risk in a constitutional convention, what a mess it is that these, senators become delegates and make 80 grand a year on top of their salary, that there aren't rules, that they don't know how long this is going to go on for, that it becomes a politicians and lobbyists game. Like, the more voters hear about these things, the very quickly they move from maybe not knowing, not have heard much about the Constitutional Convention to opposing it, because the process is such a mess, and all of our rights and our values are at stake. And that's what's so, and we have a ton of fights as progressives all over the place. There was a question earlier about how do we get young people, or how do regular citizens get involved? But rather than put this hundreds of millions of dollars towards a Constitutional Convention, all the money labor would have to put in, and all of our organizations would have to put in to fight to get delegates elected and to fight the dark money and special interests, all that stuff, we could do much better by organizing from the ground up. That is how you make change, by investing in our school boards, in our city councils, in our mayor's races, in our assembly races. Getting involved at the ground up is really the answer for progressives who I think are looking at a Trump administration that has turned the world upside down. So again, thank you for having me. Our website is New Yorkers Against Corruption. My information is on there. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you for having me again.
Wow, okay. You got a minute if you want to take it. I feel obligated to say. All right, okay. And then next up, I think it's Al next? Or no, Minister Jazz next, yes.
And I too want to say thank you so much for having me here. Crystal, thank you so much for asking me to come out. My very presence here is a testament to anything that's possible. I am a little girl from the hood in Brooklyn, but I am very learned and excited about the Constitutional Convention and the possibilities for us as a community. And I would like to say that fear is the great dream killer. And I just really inspire you to continue to open up your minds and your spirits to what's possible and not be afraid of what's not there, because it's not there, not yet. And it is an empty space, and it gets to be whatever it is that we say because we say so. And it is up to us to say and be powerful and understand what power is and where our power comes from. I am really excited about the yes that gets to happen. I would like to inspire all of you guys that would even consider running as delegates to run as delegates. To see me, I have support for you. We are building structure now because we see the vision. And it is possible, okay? So just please understand that it's a lot of fear going on, and it's been the same story. 1977 was the same exact story, 1997. If you go online, you can see the ads, the newspaper, the words. It's the same exact. It wasn't the climate under Clinton. It wasn't the climate under Carter. When will it be the time? We get to make a change, and this is our opportunity to do something different, to run for something and to stand for something like it's nobody's business. And I just encourage you to go out to the polls and understand with your spirit, even if you can't say it out loud right now because there's a lot of shaming going on for people that want to say yes. I understand. But in the booth, it's just you in the booth. It's you in the future, you and your dream. Don't let nobody be a dream killer to you. Vote yes.
All right, Mr. Bragg, you up?
Thank you all. Thank you for everyone who's had a part in putting this together and hosting this. I think it's very important part of civil engagement that we have the opportunity to hear both sides and be informed voters. So I just go back to saying that the risks outweigh the rewards. I keep hearing, talk about fear. Speaking for labor, we're not afraid of anything. We've been under attack for the last 57 years. If we were afraid, we'd be gone. Our job is to continue to fight for working families across this nation and certainly across this state. And that's what we will do and continue to do. We'll continue to use our resources to educate working families, to make sure that they understand what's at stake in a free-for-all constitutional convention, which can be lopsided and impacted by those forces and powers that do not have their interests at stake. We're not prepared to risk collective bargaining rights. We're not prepared to risk pensions, things that keep our community strong, and has changed the lives of so many people of this city and state, and people of color in particular. And so we are not prepared to risk all that by allowing people or forces that cannot be controlled, who have already stated that they will make sure that they are huge players. And you talk about whether or not national forces will be involved. There's no question that the president will be engaged in this process if there's a constitutional convention. And he'll bring the full weight of his office down on New York State to ensure that his agenda gets met and gets pushed forward by delegates who will be controlled and selected by those people who have the money, power, and influence to do it. And so I conclude by saying the risks outweigh the rewards. We understand what we have. There are many ways to change the issues that are important to us in the state. There are referendums. People have one vote. They can vote at the ballot box. And we have to continue to mobilize on the ground to reinforce the education process of workers, of voters in this city, to build a broader voting base so that more people are participatory in the voting process, and that they are participants in civics in this state, and that their voices are heard. The problem is that people do not get out and vote. So we should be spending our resources on how do we expand the voting base of this state, and how do we get more people enfranchised in political system.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Bragg. And to top it off for us here, we have Mr. Van Hoek.
So yeah, there we go again with the, let's do the same thing over and over and expect different results. Show of hands. Who woke up after Election Day in 2016 and was like, man, that went really well, let's do that again? That's what I thought. That's exactly what they're telling you. Let's do exactly the same thing we've always done and expect different results. And we're not going to get it that way.
That's right.
I've got some newspapers at the door with a lot of information. There's a lot we weren't able to cover now. Go check it out. It's got the Statue of Liberty on it. It's pointing at you saying, I need you. I need you to support the Constitutional Convention. Because quite frankly, we do. Individuals across the state do. It's overwhelmingly in favor. New Yorkers like the idea of having a Constitutional Convention because they know what our government is broken. They know that their votes don't seem to matter anymore. 42% of state-level elected officials who ran in the last election didn't have a major party challenger. Our elections aren't even competitive anymore. So they know that their votes don't matter anymore, and that's frankly driving down voter participation. If we want them to participate, we need them to feel like they matter. By the way, endorsements. Newspapers across the state have endorsed the Constitutional Convention, and this matters. Buffalo News, supportive of the Constitutional Convention. Saratoga Post-Standard, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, the Albany Times-Union, the Westchester Journal News, the Daily News in New York, Newsday, and a few other local community papers. Overwhelmingly support the Constitutional Convention. The editorial boards were expressly stated, the New York government is broken. If we want something different, we have to do something different, and it's the Constitutional Convention. We don't have a long list of organizations that we can point at that say support the Constitutional Convention. We have some good groups, largely groups that are deliberative and go from the bottom up instead of from the top down. Notably amongst them is the New York State Bar Association, the New York City Bar Association, the League of Women Voters, which quite frankly is the leading state advocate for good government and for women. They got the ability for women to vote, which we're going to have the anniversary of this year. Yay. There are a variety of people from across the state. The Committee for Constitutional Convention is literally made up of a whole bunch of prominent individuals from across the state who support the Constitutional Convention. Amongst them, former Governor David Patterson, former public advocate Betsy Gottbaum, Bertha Lewis of the Black Institute, the National Action Network, and many others. Something that gets tied up in this a lot is the difference between transformational change and transactional change. And our opponents focus a lot on the transactional change. Who's going to control what? Who's going to get elected to what? And that is not how transformational change happens. What we need in New York is transformational change. And we get transformational change by doing something different. That's what this is. And that's why they can't wrap their heads around it, because they don't know who's going to control transformational change. You know who controls transformational change? People do. And that's what this is. What, frankly, our brothers and sisters in labor need to be focused on is the federal Supreme Court decision that's coming down the pipe, which can rob not only unions in New York, but unions across the country of their collective bargaining rights. And if we were smart, you guys would be advocating for a constitutional convention so that we could shore up protections in our state constitution, so that we could guard ourselves from the Supreme Court decision coming down the pipe. That's the kind of thing that we need in New York. And let Trump come. Because when Trump starts talking about stuff, the people in New York, millions of women across the state marched, millions of people marched to protect immigrant rights. Let Trump come.
Thank you,
For
Mr.
every 2
Benningham.
Republicans in the state of New York, there are 5 Democrats. Let Trump come.
Thank you. And so now, I want to take a breather. I want to take a moment. We still have one final question for everybody, but I want to acknowledge some people who came in the room. I want to first start off by acknowledging our State Senator, Brian Benjamin, here in the 30th Senate District. I also want to acknowledge that Adrienne Felton, who represents the public advocate, was here. I saw her. Oh, there she is. She's still here. Great. And we were also joined by 2 district leaders who actually came here after another meeting. And I want to, one district leader who came here after another meeting. I think Paula Diamond Roman is, there you are, Paula, from the Broadway Democrats in the 69th came from Morningside Heights. So I want to thank them for coming. And I want to just pause, because we got a little heated. Oh, and, yes, and District Leader Wilma Brown has also arrived, and I want to thank her for coming and for her leadership in her club, which also is co-sponsoring the event. And I want to just take a moment, because we got heated, and I want to reflect on where we are, which is we are in Harlem. It is the village of Harlem. And the people in this room are people who are invested in their community, who take time. Y'all have been here for almost 3 hours. So there are people who take time out of their lives because they understand that they have 2 jobs. They got their everyday job, and then they have the job of being a citizen. And being a citizen means you pay attention, you stay up to date, you stay informed, and you make sure that your neighbors and those around you who are also part of your village are also informed and up to date and paying attention. And that's who we have here in this room. And I'm happy to see people in this room because I know that for every one of them that walks out of here, they're going to go talk to 6 or a dozen or 20 of their friends and inform them and educate them. And I want to also look at we're in the center of the community right now in Antioch Baptist Church here. And in the center of the community are 5 co-sponsoring grassroots organizations that do the hard, thankless, unpaid work of basically taking this on and putting their blood, sweat, and tears into knocking on doors, talking to their neighbors, making phone calls, organizing events, getting people to the polls, and making sure that our democracy, that the pistons of our democracy fire. And they don't get thanked enough for doing that, and I want to thank them now. So reflecting on that and reflecting on who's in the room, families have squabbles. Families have arguments. Families sometimes don't agree. But no matter what, at the end of it, they're still a family. They're still together. They're still looking out for each other, which is what I know that the people in this room are going to be doing no matter what happens. And that's why I want to conclude with this question. I don't know who submitted it, but it was so good I thought I had to save it for the end. The question is, both sides seem to agree that the process for the Constitutional Convention is inadequate to say the least. How will you change and what will your group do to ensure fairness, equitable representation, and less opportunity for corruption in our government, whether we vote yes or no? So I'm going to ask, and I forget who concluded last, I'm going to ask, I think the pro side, what will you do if the voters vote no on November 7th? What will you be doing November 8th to keep doing the work you're doing and advancing the causes you're fighting for? You'll each speaker can take a minute on that.
Okay, yeah, I don't give up easy. I don't know if I've communicated that yet or not. I'm going to be doing the same thing that I've always done, and it started back in my early activism in New York. When I was president of Manhattan Young Democrats, I started this project. We called it the Open Seat Project. And what we did was we noticed that a whole bunch of young people wanted to get engaged in the political process, but they were not being included. So we got 80 people across the county of Manhattan to run for county committee in very nearly every district. And we got them all elected. And we showed up to our first county committee meeting, all 80 of us, and people freaked out. Because that is not something that is done very often. But I will tell you that we didn't raise a single dollar to do that. We organized on our own, outside of the party, amongst ourselves. We reached out to everybody who would listen, and we did everything that we could to make as much change as we could. And I would say, actually, because they've continued the project, the Manhattan Young Democrats have continued the open seat project since we started in 2009. They've continued that project, and it has gotten more young people involved and it has gotten the party better. And that's the kind of activism that I'm going to continue on November 8th, regardless of what the outcome is.
Thank you, Al Bettinghoff. And I don't know if we want to alternate, if we just want to pass it down the line. Okay. Minister Jazz, since we were doing pro and con, can you take a minute to talk about the work you'll be doing on November 8th, should the voters choose no on November 7th and we're not going to have a con-con?
I will probably find myself on the some side of the gubernatorial election and trying to figure out how we can really impact change. I came to the convention because I was looking for solutions, and I was looking hard for solutions. I create social justice curriculum for youth, and I work really closely in the communities and with opportunity youth. I like to call my kids disenfranchised and dropouts, but they're pushed out because of the system. And I realized that I was accomplice to the school to prison pipeline every day that I was going to work, and things weren't changing. So I will continue to do that advocacy, and I will be doing it on an even higher level than I've currently been doing it. Like I said, I came to the convention because I saw it as a way for fundamental change to happen. And I will continue that struggle and that fight and that stand for the youth, because they are the future. I have 3 children, and it is for them that I stand.
Thank you. And now I'm going to pose the same question to the con side, flip a little bit. Should the voters choose yes on November 7th and have a constitutional convention against your arguments, what will your organizations be doing to keep fighting for what you want to see in New York State? And we'll start with Jordan, and then we'll end with Mr. Brown.
Well, as I mentioned, if there is a constitutional convention, there will be no choice, I think, but for labor and for women's organizations, for groups that represent communities of color, for groups that represent the rights of immigrants, environmental groups. There's no question that everyone will have to roll up their sleeves and get very involved in very difficult battles to get delegates elected and then to fight on the floor. But it's part of one of the major challenges, I think, that any of these organizations, the ACLU, that are defending ourselves, labor's defending themselves, it's like there's a limited amount of money that we have, a little bit amount of resources, and it pales in comparison to what the Republicans have, to what these billionaires have, to what the Mercers have and the Kochs have. And so we will fight it out, but all these groups are standing together saying, please, we have a lot of fights on our hands. We don't need this fight, just to protect our very basic rights and freedoms, everything. And it's not just for these organizations, but it's for all New Yorkers. There's just too much at stake.
Thank you. And I just wanted to offer one last clarification, because the question author came up to me and clarified. It would be, what would you do to ensure to fix the brokenness of our process, to fix the problem that Black people and women and all sorts of other people are not represented in this
process.
In the process, yes.
Less corruption.
Okay. Labor has been remaking itself, considering all the attacks that it's been under over many years. What I think we should do, because I don't speak for all labor, I can speak for SEIU. I think what we should do is make sure that we continue to educate working families about holding those people who will be responsible for making changes to, or proposing changes to the Constitution, accountable to those changes, and make sure those changes represent the interests of working families in this state. I think we will continue to do the things that we've done on the ground, educating folks about rights and change that need to happen in this state and this country on LGBTQ community, immigration, fair and affordable housing, the income, the wealth disparity. These are the things that we work on every day, and we will continue to work on. We will make sure that education is a priority for our community so that the next generation have opportunities that to succeed in this country. We will make sure that we continue to organize low-wage workers so that they can be vital contributors to both their community and to this state and this nation. We will make sure that we hold our elected officials accountable to the people, and we will continue to put forth legislation that is representative of the working families of this state.
Got it. Thank you. So we are about to end on time. I'm going to close it off, but I would encourage people to stay afterwards because this is discourse, this is democracy, Harlem style in the village of Harlem, where we do it right, and we don't leave until we've gotten the answers we want. So I want to, again, thank all of our panelists. We can get a round of applause for them, for educating us, for making the arguments. Give yourselves a round of applause for being here, for being active participants in our democracy, making sure that you're informed. And now I would like to turn it over for closing remarks to our State Senator Brian Benjamin.
Good evening. I'll be very brief. First, let me say I saw the end of this because I had a couple other events, but I love the passion on both sides. I have an opinion, but I will not share it because it will be inappropriate to the conversation we had tonight. Really quickly, the NAACP Mid-Manhattan branch, the Next Generation Committee, is going to have the new movement and NAACP initiative at the Salvation Army Community Center. If you're interested in that, please find Chanel Washington, who is around here somewhere. She just left, but she's outside. No, she's outside. She's right out the door. Let me just say, one of the things that I think either way you should come out of this saying is that we need to get you more politically engaged. I want to thank the political clubs of the 70th Assembly District that helped put this together. I'm sure you said the names earlier, so I won't repeat all the clubs. But please get involved in our political activism. We are dealing with, I'm in the state Senate. We are dealing with some real issues in the state. We got what's going on in Washington, D.C., and the only way that we're going to make our community better, con or no con, is by us being more engaged in the political activity of this community, these seats, who's running for the various seats. I like what you were saying about getting involved in the gubernatorial race. This is incredibly important that we drive who's in elective office, because that, at the end of the day, is our right as citizens to participate and to make sure that our voices are heard. So thank you for letting me say a couple of remarks. I think this was a great panel from what I heard, and I respect the fact that we're all here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Benjamin. And so in closing, once again, I want to give another round of applause to our fabulous panelists. Thank you for coming out, spending your time with us, and informing and enlightening us. Once again, I want to thank everyone here in attendance for taking your few hours of this day, valuable time, to come out, to be enlightened, to be informed. Some of you came with convicted votes, and so now they might be conflicted. Some might still stand in their original decisions, but I'm hoping that we've achieved our goal, that we've given you both sides of the issues, unbiased still, I hope, and that you'll be more informed, enlightened. The goal is to now take this information to go and continue the conversation with your neighbors, your family, your friends, and continue the broader conversation, opposed to just someone telling you sway one way or the other.